You're looking at the most powerful car I've ever reviewed, and it's a Kia. This thing's putting out 430 kilowatts, which is 576 horsepower, and 740 newton meters of torque. That means this can go 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 3.5 seconds. And it will complete a quarter mile in just 11.4 seconds at over 200 kilometers an hour. But it's still quiet and comfortable enough to take your grandma to church on a Sunday. Now, Kia is going to ask you to fork out just under $100,000 for this thing here. And so apart from face melting performance, what else are you getting when you give Kia $100,000 for this car here? Well, for starters, you can get this really nice matte paint, which really stands out against other electric cars. And you've also got these matrix LED lights, which look fantastic and even have a scrolling indicator function. Now, what else is different from a normal EV6 are these 21-inch wheels, and they're wrapped in a performance Michelin Pilot Sport tire to give you extra grip. Now, it's not very different from other EV6s apart from the wheels, so then Kia had another brilliant idea to help people quickly distinguish this is the GT model. I'll give you 2 seconds to figure out what that is. Yes, it's those acid green brakes. The green theme is something that runs throughout this car, but it's most obvious inside those wheels with those upgraded brakes. And you also have upgraded suspension to help this thing handle a little bit better, but to most people, they're not going to be able to tell the difference from a glance. And there's some ever so slight revisions to the bodywork here. At the back, we have this chrome strip that runs along the back, and it looks a little bit rose goldy and something similar to what we saw on the Kia Stinger GT. And then down below, we have some slight changes to the rear reverse light and some other reflectors down here to make it a little bit more distinguishable as a Kia EV6 GT. Now up front here, it's far more obvious this is a Kia EV6 GT thanks to these fantastic bucket seats. These look great. They have those lime acid green inserts as well, as you can see running along as piping and stitching, and they have some Alcantara type material to keep your butt in place. So it does a good job of matching those subtle touches on the exterior of this car. Now also some other green elements here, like this stitching around the steering wheel and a giant bright green GT button on the steering wheel, which gives you access to GT mode, which is the fastest mode in this car. Now there's also a GT badge up here on the dashboard, and you can go through here and customize your drive mode, something you probably wouldn't see on another EV6 like this. So we can go through into settings, into vehicle, and you can jump into drive mode. Now you have your normal drive modes, but then you can go through here and customize a drive mode to have access to the motor, steering, suspension, ELSD response, and your ESC, which is pretty cool. So you can go through and customize the drive mode there instead of being bound by the ones you have on tap. And just like the EV6 I've driven before, this does have a mode to adjust your brake feel. So you have a normal and you have a sport response, which is pretty cool to be able to change that, which many other cars don't get that luxury. But truthfully, that's about it when it comes to the upgrades that this car sees in the front. Now, what is annoying is that these bucket seats can't be adjusted quickly. They are manually adjusted seats, even though this is a $100,000 car. In the back, we have more Alcantara type material and more green stitching, which lets you know this is the GT model. And you can sit here and get really comfortable in the back seat. And I'm serious, you can get really, really comfortable. Even though your knees are a bit higher up, it's gonna be more comfortable than a Tesla Model 3. But unfortunately, miss out on a sunroof. There's no big glass roof like many other electric cars in this category, but I mean, some people might prefer that. And we have more Alcantara type material up here on the door to make it feel a little bit more premium. But thanks to these bucket seats, I have plenty of knee room, plenty of feet room, and I can adjust the angle of these seats to get really comfortable for long trips. And if I do have to cop the middle seat, it's not that bad because I have plenty of feet room, I have a flat load floor, and I have an okay amount of butt room as well. And we have two Type-C USB ports up the back, and there's one Type-C port up the front with a Type-A port there as well for charging. So plenty of places to charge. Now, what is cool is that you do have an actual household plug underneath the seat here. So you can plug proper plugs into this car and charge maybe a laptop or even power a console if you want to do that when you're driving along. It just makes it more versatile to use the power in here rather than having to buy any adapters. Now, boot space in the EV6 GT makes this one of the most practical cars that has supercar performance. Now here we have a relatively okay boot. It sits in between like the Model 3 and the Model Y if you're looking for a point of reference to a competitor. Underneath here we have some additional storage for things like our charging cables, and then this fancy thing which is called a vehicle to load adapter. And I actually used this during the week because we had a big blackout and we had to sit in darkness for a while. And I had the brilliant idea of going down to the garage while there was a blackout and using this car as a giant battery pack. So you can go ahead and plug this in to the charging port just here, and it gives you another household plug outlet. So I can go ahead and run my phone and run that as a Wi-Fi hotspot, and then power my laptop on the inside to watch movies in air conditioning or using heated seats while I wait for the blackout to subside. Now you can fold these seats down in a 60-40 split so you can get more room and make the most of this giant hatchback opening. Now the biggest disappointment back here is the materials that are used in the boot. It's scratchy plastics, and if you have any loose groceries, because there's no obvious grocery hooks for any shopping bags, they're gonna go everywhere and make a huge racket. Considering how much grip this car can produce, it's gonna make any loose items smash against that plastic and just sound horrible. So that's why I brought out the net to secure these loose items, because it's actually necessary to do that. Now when it comes to fueling up your super EV, it's only gonna take you 18 minutes to charge from 10 to 80% from a fast charger, which is pretty good. So you're not gonna have to wait too long around at a charging port just to be able to take advantage of zero emissions performance. But something I will note is that using a household plug to charge this car, it takes a really long time. Compared to the Tesla Model Y performance I had the week before, that does a good job of accepting a trickle charge, where this doesn't really do that all that well. So it likes a fast charge, but trickle charging I found a little bit difficult. So it's probably recommended you install a faster charger in your garage if you plan to charge this at home more often than out on the road. And that's pretty cool too. And of course, underneath the clamshell bonnet, you have an engine cover, but it's not an engine cover, it's a very small frunk, which is great for taking an extra pair of socks or underpants for your passengers who might be a bit scared from what 0 to 100 feels like in 3.5 seconds. And so in case you lose control of all 576 horsepower, this Kia does score a 5 out of 5 from Australia's ANCAP safety rating system. There's plenty of active safety features here to keep you on the road, and even with traction control turned off, this car has an amazing amount of grip, so it's going to be pretty impossible to bin it unless you're just pretty careless with this amount of power. And it does come with a 7-year warranty, which is a lot better than some other supercars that offer this same amount of performance. And the best thing as well is that a lot of owners who have reviewed this car here in Australia via ProductReview.com.au have rated it a 5 out of 5 in terms of an ownership experience. They've really enjoyed it, but it is worth noting that wait times for this thing are quite high at the moment. So if you want one of these, you have to sit tight and be a little bit patient. But I can tell you, it's worth the wait because this thing launches like a rocket. So I've actually driven a lot of electric cars at my time here at Product Review Cars, and I thought Kia EV6 GT, yep, you get over 500 horsepower, you're getting a ton of torque, and it's all-wheel drive. What's so exciting about that? Which sounds lame, because like I mentioned, this is the most powerful car I've ever reviewed, and I should be more excited when I hear about getting a car like this, but I was a bit, unsure. Electric cars, they're great, but they all sort of drive the same. That's what a lot of other car reviewers I've heard say, and I didn't think that was true until I hopped into a Lucid Air when I was visiting the United States. Now, Lucid Air produces minimum around 800 horsepower, and you can peak it at around 1,000 horsepower. So it is a mighty powerful car. That was the most powerful car I've ever driven. And guess what? It drove just the same as a BMW i4, which is a lot less money than that and a lot less power. And I sort of went, hang on, all these cars are starting to drive the same. So jumping into this, I thought, okay, started driving it along. Feels a lot the same as the Kia EV6 in any flavor, pretty much. More similarly to the GT line since it's all-wheel drive. And I thought, yeah, it looks cooler, but is that about it? Well, no, it's not. There's a lot more here than you might think. And it's probably the most engaging electric car I've driven to date. Now, I've driven the Tesla Model Y Performance and I've driven some other fast electric cars, but this is the best handling and best driving one I've experienced. Now, I praise the EV6 GT line for being an amazing handling electric car, but this is where the EV6 GT shines. So like I've gone through all those upgrades that it's got, including suspension, wheels, tires, and you even got your battery and motor upgrades. You have got a car that is ready to race. This thing doesn't have a track mode, but it definitely should. Now, we have a couple of different drive modes. We have Eco, which I'm in now, and that sort of increases your range to the max amount, but it also, these drive modes actually make a huge difference in how this car drives. So you're actually cutting power and throttle response in each drive mode, or increasing it depending on which drive mode you jump into. Now, you even have your own custom mode, which allows you to tune everything from the suspension to the steering to the motor feel of this car, which is pretty cool. So you can give yourself the max amount of power, but have a nice relaxed suspension setup. So there's a lot of customization to this car through the drive modes. Now, normal is pretty standard. It's what this car usually starts up in for most people, and it's stock standard. There isn't anything too crazy with normal. You just get a bit more power than Eco. Now, sport is where things get a little bit more exciting, and you can sort of drive along and you start to feel the power of this car, but it just sort of feels a bit similar to the EV6 GT line. But before I jump into GT mode, which is the most important mode in this car, I have to talk about the handling. This thing is pretty stiff feeling. Even though it has adjustable dampers, it does feel like a more stiff car compared to other EV6s that I've driven. I'm not too sure if it's because it's been a while since I've been in an EV6, but it does feel a little bit more aggressive, which is what you want in a car like this. Now, you go ahead and press GT mode, and it allows you to sort of decelerate and then absolutely, oh my gosh, just get an insane amount of power out of this car. So you can do all-wheel drive burnouts in this thing as you accelerate. Now, the steering feel, still not super responsive. It's a little bit numb, but it does actually tighten up a bit more when you start to increase your speed, which is pretty cool. So at least you get a bit more feel the faster you go, and it sort of loosens up for when you're doing city driving, which is, you know, as expected. Now, the throttle response is insane, of course, because this is an electric car. You're getting nearly 800 Newton meters of torque at 0 RPM. So your launches are just ridiculous. So you can go into your one pedal driving mode, and then you can sort of just feel how quick this car is by just stomping on it in 3, 2, 1. Oh my gosh! This thing will go from 0 to jail speeds in like no time at all. So like I said, the official 0 to 100 time in this is 3.5 seconds, and there is no doubt in my mind you could achieve that in this car. Now, as you can see just there, this does have pretty stiff suspensions, so potholes you have to watch out for, especially with these larger wheels. But the good thing is that regenerative braking is nice and responsive, so as quickly as you get up to the speed limit and maybe beyond, you can lift off that throttle and decelerate the car and get some of that energy back in. Now, as for the brakes, electric cars are kind of funny. They're not really like a conventional petrol car where the brakes do matter a lot, because you have a lot of regenerative braking on top of your upgraded brakes. So if I was doing an emergency stop in 3, 2, 1, and this car decelerates really quite well, despite this being a very heavy vehicle. Now, here's where things get interesting. This car, it does a really good job of cornering. Like, it's probably the best cornering electric car I've driven, because I haven't had a go at the Taycan or anything too aggressive. The Taycan is a lot of money compared to this car. $100,000 seems like a bit of a bargain all of a sudden. So driving around in this, you're going, okay, it's really fast in a straight line speed, but so is a similarly priced Tesla Model Y. So what makes this more special? Well, it's the eLSD that they put into this car. So there's been a lot of development in this car to make sure it handles well. Now, it might have sort of similar shapes to a small SUV, but I can tell you what, thanks to that low center of gravity, thanks to those batteries being all the way low, this thing corners insanely well. You can sort of just hook up into a corner and just you have heaps of fun. You think that this weight of a car would just start sliding forwards with a bit of understeer, but instead it just hooks up and corners through like nothing else that I've experienced that has this much power and is an electric car. Like, as we travel through here, it's just insane how flat this thing can handle. Oh my gosh. It's something that was the biggest surprise. So as I was saying, a lot of electric cars drive the same, but then it comes down to how they handle and how they sound. But of course, we need to see what this thing launches like again. So in 3, 2, 1, and Oh my gosh. This is the fastest car I've tested, and it's just incredible. I mean, the way this thing just puts its power down is pretty respectable. Even though GT mode turns off your traction control, this thing does still hook up and grip really well. And then once you're done having all your fun and smiling like there's no tomorrow, you can go back into normal and eco mode, and this thing does ride pretty well as a daily driver. So you can go do the school run after you've just been doing burnouts using the integrated burnout mode. Yes, that is a thing that this car has, but unfortunately in Australia, that will get you arrested if you use that or even film it. So yes, I can tell you this car has a burnout mode, but unfortunately in these circumstances, I can't show it to you, but maybe I'll ask Kia very nicely if we can test it on another day. And finally, something that I thought was really cool is that you can go through here and actually turn on a button that says maximum power output mode for your battery. So it's gonna heat up the battery to give you the most amount of power and response in a car like this, which is just insane. So you're doing a track day, for example, and you want your batteries up to temperature, you can go ahead and press that button there, and away you go. Now, I can also assume you could probably use that to warm the battery up for optimum charging, which would be pretty cool, but there wasn't really anything here that was clearly laid out for me to precondition the battery before going charging, which I thought was a little bit annoying compared to what Tesla does, which they automatically do that when you route the GPS to a charger. And another thing I noticed is that you definitely can hear a lot of rocks being kicked up into the wheel wells here, so sound isolation is pretty good. But then once you go into some rough sections of road, you can just hear it a little bit more. And I'm not too sure if that's an EV6 GT specific problem or something that that's just a pretty normal occurrence. But I did notice that on the Tesla Model Y performance, that wasn't really a big issue. So look, unlike other conventional performance cars, there's no gearbox review here. There's not really much braking, and there's not much sound coming out of this car either. So what you have here is just a brilliant electric performance car. And yes, the price is high, but it's one of those cars that I think you need to realize it's undercutting a lot of the competition around this point. So we're looking at the European players like the Porsche Taycan and the Audi e-tron RS. But you need to be aware that if you don't need this power, or you've never driven an electric car before, you might be fine just with the GT line. That is still a lot of power and torque, but you don't really need this unless you plan to do track driving, you've had an electric car before, or you are looking for a performance electric car that doesn't spew out your local emissions wherever you go. And also charging is pretty cheap compared to filling up a petrol tank every couple of days. So how do I sum up this car? It's got a lot going for it, and it's also very expensive. So what I'm gonna label it as is the best value performance EV you can buy. For $100,000, you don't really need anything else. You can go and spend more on something like a Porsche Taycan or an Audi RS e-tron, but here you have something that's the complete package for a pretty reasonable price compared to those other performance EVs. Now, compared to other electric cars, this is more expensive, so I wouldn't say you would cross-shop this with something like a BYD Atto. Instead, what you have is one of the best handling, one of the best braking, and one of the best driving electric cars you can buy, and that is a price to pay. You can pay for cheaper electric cars, but they won't be as quick to charge, they won't be as good to drive, and yeah, they're just a normal electric car, where this just feels a little bit more special and punches above its weight when considering the cars it's trying to go up against that costs a lot more money. And so before I go, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. It helps me get more cars like this to review for you. And if you want to see more performance EV reviews and hopefully get my hands on something like a Porsche Taycan, make sure you smash that subscribe button, leave a comment, and if you like this review, like it. If you didn't like it, make sure you dislike it as well, and I'll see you in the next one.